Hello. If you are new here, my name is Simone McNish. I am a DEI practitioner, a consultant, and I focus my time on inclusive communication, inclusive employer branding, and making sure that organizations and small businesses feel like an amazing place to work and are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So before we get started talking a little bit about inclusive employer branding, we have to define what is inclusive employer branding. What is it? Does it mean that there are just diverse stock photos, or the one token black person at your organization is being paraded around at every single event? I've been that person. I have been that token black person at an organization that doesn't have any other black people, and all of a sudden you're on every single photo. And let me tell you, employees and potential folks, candidates who want to work at your organization, they can tell that there's that one person who's cycling around. So let's define what is inclusive employer branding. So let's talk about what inclusive employer branding actually is. What does it mean? So this is my definition that I've created. I just want to say that. But inclusive employer branding is when an organization internally and externally prioritizes values, policies, practices, and demonstrates a commitment to equity for all employees. You saw me looking away there because I have it on my screen as well, and I wanted to make sure I got my own definition right. So when it comes to operationalizing it, it looks like an inclusive employer brand is actively attempting to uplift and amplify marginalized voices, demonstrates a commitment to DEI through internal and external communications, meaning marketing, job postings, internal communication if they have an intranet, that they're really centering equity for all of their employees. These organizations also operationalize their values. And what does that mean? So they operationalize their values. Let's say they have a commitment to inclusion. So a commitment to inclusion would look like transparently communicating what are the actions that we're actually taking as an organization to prioritize equity. Are we just sitting around and saying, wow, we did another training, yay for us, or we have these diverse stock photos that we're doing, or we're doing an overhaul of our entire website to make sure that inclusion is in mind with all of our language. We're changing out gendered language to more gender neutral language, things like that. But it really centers around the action. And so there have been a lot of critiques about inclusive employer branding, with good reason, because I will talk about this later, but we need to make sure, as an organization, if you're watching this and you are a part of an organization, maybe you're in charge of employer branding, you want to make it a little more inclusive. Make sure that you have that foundation of actually executing, and planning DEI work, making sure that you have a DEI strategy, because doing the fluffy language around inclusion is not going to create an inclusive employer brand. It's really going to start from the inside out to create this employer brand. And like I said before, this is more than just marketing images and fluffy language. It is truly about thinking about what is the core of the business, what are the amazing benefits that we have, what are the perks about working here, what are the unique employee stories that we can activate and bubble up. I always say bubble up, but amplify to make sure that if a potential job seeker is trying to work at our organization or shopping around as many candidates do, that they know that this is the right place for them, that they know that this culture aligns with their values and the organizational values merge into one amazing thing, and more people we can share about this amazing organization. And if your brand is not inclusive, then you will start to hear about it. And so let's talk a little bit about how you can tell if an organization is investing the time and energy into cultivating a more inclusive employer brand. So let's start with internally. So a lot of times when we are thinking about an employer brand, we're thinking about only the external. We're thinking about all of the external facing communication and all the external things that go in place to create an employer brand. But that is not the only part of an employer brand. And I want to say it starts internally. And so if you have an inclusive employer brand at an organization, some of the places that you will see it are, number one, frequent communication about DEI efforts and DEI actions and DEI progress, right? If you only see a communication once per year about your annual DEI training, crickets, crickets, crickets. You know that the organization is probably not committed to equity. They're probably not committed to DEI. They're probably just doing the nice little checkbox thing and just moving on. And so a truly inclusive employer brand, and honestly an inclusive organization, a company that is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, will have more frequent updates. And that's one of the things that I do with my clients is make sure that they are not just centering around it has to be done, it has to be perfect to communicate anything about DEI. So a lot of times organizations want to communicate when they've created their full DEI roadmap or when they have their training on the books. But it's really great to gather feedback before that final stage and really get employee buy-in and get employees to weigh in on what are the DEI efforts. So an inclusive employer brand, one telltale sign will be frequent communication around DEI efforts. Another area and a sign that the organization is attempting and making efforts to be a more inclusive employer brand is frequently seeking feedback. So having feedback mechanisms in place that share, so employees can share, hey, this is our most recent effort for work-life balance, or this is our most recent effort to be featured on our at work page Instagram, right? How do you feel about it? And if the organization is not doing that, then it's going to be very hard to build an inclusive employer brand, because a truly inclusive employer brand listens to the needs of their employees, whether it be policies, whether it be another pizza party, probably not another pizza party, right? Whether it be childcare benefits, whatever it is. And so an inclusive employer brand will actually put the call out and say, we want to know what you think. And then not just let's gather the information and let it die in a file or an email, but let's operationalize an action, make action with that data that we've gathered. That is an inclusive employer brand. And the bonus part is your employees will start talking about it. They will say, oh my gosh, they listened. Thank you much for extending our parental leave policy. Thank you so much for giving us an unlimited PTO policy. Thank you for making a work from anywhere policy where we can log in at different times of the day as long as we do our full work, right? So those are what make a truly inclusive employer brand. Another area and sign that the brand or organization, because I keep on saying brand and organization, branding is the consistency in which it happens. An organization can do any of these things at a one-off thing, but when it comes to branding, what makes it be more of a brand move is the consistency and the continuous efforts, right? A brand isn't something that just does things one time and it's done, right? And the same goes with inclusivity and prioritizing equity inside of an organization. If your organization or the organization is known for making this commitment, that is going to be woven into the fabric of the organization. It's going to be woven into the values. It's going to be woven into the mission and everyday activities. That's how you'll know you truly have an employer brand that is inclusive, is if inclusivity is woven into all of those fabrics. Another area is inclusive language. If you see inclusive language, gender neutral language, making sure that pronouns are being utilized and shared, in communications and materials, at meetings, things like that, then the brand or organization is truly making an effort to say, this is the standard of inclusion. And lastly, another huge area internally that will show that employer branding has been prioritized and inclusion has been prioritized is generous policies. So I already spoke about this a little bit, but thinking about having generous parental policies, gender inclusive policies, especially around healthcare and what is defined as a family. This is very much important to attract talent that comes from all different backgrounds and talent that has maybe different family structures, alternative family structures. We want to make sure as an organization that if you have that organization, that it is a safe space for everyone. And you cannot guarantee as an organization that it's a safe space, but what you can guarantee is some really freaking good benefits, right? So we're thinking about, like I mentioned, parental policy, benefits, perks, anything that makes it great to work there. Unlimited PTO, I mentioned work from anywhere. Maybe you have a food stipend. There was an organization that I worked for at once that they had a food stipend, and I was like, awesome, I can spend $10 a day on lunch. And it was so nice. We get this discounted lunch, and it was every day. It wasn't just during travel, right? So making sure that there are policies. There was another organization that I interned for that they were a travel tech company, and they paid for I think it was a 2-week trip anywhere in the world. All you had to do was pitch their software while you were there. And that was such a cool perk. That was such an inclusive employer brand move. Yes, it benefited the organization, but it also truly benefited the amazing employees who got to travel, who got to share their excitement for the product and really be the brand ambassador there. So there can be really creative ways to make the organization a more inclusive employer brand and known for inclusion. You might be watching this and wondering, what are some examples of an inclusive employer brand? Well, I got you. I got you today. I got some examples. I pulled some examples based on their external branding. Also, I've known some folks who work at these organizations and have been there for a very long time and rave about their experience working there. So these are both from my personal account, my personal network, what they promote online. And I looked at areas like, are they amplifying marginalized employee voices? Does it look like they have a great work-life balance and they're sharing that? Do they have great policies? Are they making a difference in their community? So I looked at some areas like that, and I pulled up this really quick short list, and I will quickly run through them and share just a few highlights about why they have an inclusive employer brand, in my opinion. And just, these are some bigger organizations, and I want also to say that there's no perfect organizations. These organizations have definitely had issues, right? The bigger the organization, the more likely they are to have issues, to have areas where they can improve. But it seems like they've taken some of that feedback to heart and really invested heavily, spent a lot of time, energy, resources into creating an inclusive employer brand that at the core provides an inclusive experience to their employees, centers equity, and prioritizes transparent communication. So the first one is Google. So Google, yes, there are some issues. I recognize that, right? But in terms of their employer brand, let's just talk about the external experience. Externally, they invest heavily into inclusive employer ads. So they have a lot of representation, racial pretty much all across the board. I always use Google in my examples when I talk about trainings for inclusive employer branding or inclusive marketing, because they do a really good job of saying who's not in the room, who can we feature in these ads, who can we amplify and tell their story or help them tell their story, give them agency to tell their story. They also have a very public DEI commitment. So they are committed to equity, they're committed to inclusion, they invest millions of dollars there, and you know that they do it because they talk about it, right? They don't just make it a secret that they silo away. Another organization that is near and dear to my heart as an inclusive employer brand is HubSpot. So HubSpot is a marketing platform. I've actually used HubSpot before. They have amazing customer service, and I have used their chatbots, and their just client experience is amazing, but they also do a great job of having amazing perks and benefits. They have unlimited PTO, they have a public code of conduct, or they call it a culture code. They have some really amazing benefits about working there. They also have been voted the best place to work for parents, and for me as a parent, that is amazing, because having flexible work policies and making sure that parents are supported. There are so many parents in the workforce right now that are not supported, so HubSpot does get a Crown Award for being an inclusive employer brand. Another one is Upwork. Upwork has made many public commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, just like Google, and they are growing as an organization. But what I've also noticed about them is their commitment lies beyond, like, we like DEI, this is our mission, this is our values. They operationalize it by being transparent about their leadership. They actually have leadership photos on their website. I know for a fact, they have a whole team that's completely prioritizing DEI. So they have a lot of times at different organizations, they have just one person that does DEI. They have their chief diversity officer, chief equity officer, and then they have one person under them. But what's really interesting about Upwork is that they have a whole team that is devoted specifically to DEI, which shows a significant investment, which shows a commitment to equity, which goes right back into their employer brand, right? After hearing about how all of those organizations have put time, effort, resources into creating a more inclusive employer brand, you might be wondering, how can you do that at your organization? Maybe you work in employer branding, maybe you work in HR, maybe you own your own organization and you're the CEO and you're just browsing on how to get this process started. Well, what do you do next? Number one, I think it is an amazing opportunity, if you have the budget, if your organization has the budget, to hire a DEI consultant. Okay, and so a lot of times as organizations, we want to do everything ourselves, right? I have worked with so many organizations that want to just take the easy route. They want to do the checkbox. They want to say, cool, we did this, we did this, we did this. But as you can tell through this video, employer branding is something that is not just a one-off. It is a continuous effort. It is something that needs to be built upon, tested, measured, see if certain things are working, see if employees are responding to the changes that you're making. And so hiring a consultant to start pinpointing and auditing your inclusive employer brand is a great start. And what happens is usually the consultant may start to audit the inclusive employer brand or just employer brand in general and see that there are some big gaps in terms of policies, practices, culture, all of these things. And it may be that the organization needs to kind of get to the root of why employees don't feel that it is an inclusive employer brand, or the reputation may be tarnished. You have to get to the root of why those things are happening. And so areas that you can look at When we're thinking about external brand, we have to think about Glassdoor and Indeed. We have to think about job postings, social media, all of these areas that a consultant can audit and say, based on what I viewed, you've got some work to do. We've got some internal work to do, and then we can start looking at this external problem, right? And so I highly recommend hiring a consultant. If you need a consultant, I am here. I do this work very frequently. You can see the information on how to hire me or get in contact with me or schedule a brief call to understand a little bit more about my process. But that is one way that you can get started on this inclusive employer brand journey, is hiring a consultant like myself. Number two, if you don't have budget, if this is purely something that you as an employee brand manager or HR person is very personally passionate about, but you really haven't made the case for this yet, you can do some work yourself. You can look at creating a campaign to audit language in all marketing materials. You can put some pressure on the leadership team to give a verbal or internal commitment to DEI that reflects their external commitment. Put some pressure on them to say, what are we doing next? Like, what is our DEI plan? What does our roadmap look like, right? You can also make sure that you are checking out your policies. So are policies easy to find? Are they inclusive? Are there areas that they could be updated and become a little bit more modernized and inclusive? There are things you can do, and there's so many resources to get you started. So thank you for watching this video about inclusive employer branding. Please stay tuned because there will be more. I can't speak today, and I'm doing minimal editing, but there will be more videos on inclusive employer branding and inclusive communication on this channel. So please subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, and if you found it helpful, share it with your colleagues, share it with other people in employer branding and other organizations who are looking to invest within their organization for DEI work. So thank you so much for being here. I will talk to you soon.